They say every warrior is born twice. The first time, when he breathes. Second time, when he awakens. Between these two existences lies an abyss, and few have the courage to cross it. Samurai Haru believed he knew the meaning of strength. He had wielded a sword since childhood. He knew the weight of the steel, the sound of the blade cutting through the air, the tension before a duel. But over time, the body he trained had become a refuge for a visible enemy. It wasn't another warrior. It was himself. The weak self. This enemy wore no armor, wielded no sword, he whispered. He spoke in moments of weariness, in the early hours of doubt, on days when pain was more real than purpose. He said, "There is no more meaning. Enough is enough." He believed it. The inner war is the most silent and the most cruel, because in it there are no spectators, only you, facing your own shadows. For years, Haru fought external battles, defeating the enemy, protecting his clan, honoring the name of his ancestors. But each victory left a strange feeling, as if something was emptying out. As if the weight of the sword grew while his spirit diminished. One night, looking at the reflection of the blade under the moonlight, he realized he no longer saw a warrior. He saw a tired man, full of pride and fear. He realized he no longer fought for purpose, he fought for identity. He fought to prove he was still strong, because deep down he feared being weak. It was that night that he decided to do something few would do. He sheathed his sword. He sat before it and remained motionless. The sound of the wind in the bamboo grove seemed like the breathing of the earth itself. And then he asked a question he had never dared before. Who am I without the sword? Silence answered. And silence is always more cruel than any enemy. Following days he refused to train. He refused battles, missions, and he locked himself in the clan's temple and began the ritual of destruction. Not of the body, but of the mind. The destruction of the weak self begins when you stop running from it. At first, the emptiness is unbearable. Haru sat for hours in silence and felt his body burn, his heart beat erratically, his mind filled with voices, memories of defeats, regrets, anger. The entire past paraded before his eyes, as if begging to be reached. Each memory was a blade turned inward. On one of those days, he dreamed of the master who had trained him as a child, a man with a calm gaze, who always said, "The sword that conquers the world must first conquer the one who wields it." He woke up sweating, with the feeling that the dream was a warning, and he understood. The mind that carries fear never holds a real sword, only an extension of its own illusion. In the following days, he decided to face the invisible enemy with the same discipline with which he trained his body. He would wake before dawn, kneel on the tatami mat, remain motionless until the sun touched the ground. His mind reacted. Thoughts came like waves trying to sweep him away. Desires, memories, doubts, all mixed together. But he stayed. Over time, he began to hear something beyond the noise, his own breath. The sound of air going in and out was like the rhythm of an ancient drum. In this repetition, something began to. The first thing that dies on the path of transformation. Haru's body ached. Time seemed slow. Loneliness surrounded him. Little by little, something in his gaze began to change. His mind, which had once raced like an untamed horse, now walked in circles until tired. One early morning during meditation, the wind blew strongly, extinguishing the candle before him. The room plunged into darkness, and for a moment, he felt fear. A deep, ancient, almost childlike fear, the fear of nothingness. But instead of lighting another candle, he remained there in the dark. Minutes turned into hours. The darkness began to feel familiar. He breathed into it. And then, for the first time, he understood what the master. There is no way to destroy the weak self by fighting against it. One must enter the darkness, till one becomes darkness itself. The following morning, when the sun pierced through the cracks in the temple, Haru rose with a rigid body and a serene gaze. Something inside had changed. It wasn't euphoria. Stillness. In the following days, he took up his sword again. But now, the movements were different. There was no haste, no unnecessary force. Each blow was precise, each breath measured. The weak self was still there, whispering, testing, provoking. But now its voice sounded distant. He understood that the weak self never disappeared. It only loses its throne. During training, he remembered something his master used to say while watching the leaves fall in autumn. The mind should be like the wind that shakes the trees, but not like the leaf that is carried away by it. This phrase became his mantra. Weeks passed. The temple routine blended with the cycle of the sun and moon. Training, meditating, cleansing, eating. His body began to strengthen again, this time from the inside out. The focus was no longer on winning, it was on understanding. Over time, the sword became just a tool again, not a symbol. He discovered that the true enemy was never on the battlefield, always in the mirror. One night, he decided to face his reflection head-on. He knelt before the dark lake and looked at his own image. He stayed there for hours, observing every feature, every wrinkle, every reflected shadow, till the image began to distort. He saw, in the water, not the man he was, but the boy who once wanted to prove his worth, the young man who feared failure, the warrior who fought to be seen. And it was at that moment that he understood the weak self is not his enemy, it is his prisoner. He didn't need to destroy it with violence, but to liberate it with truth. The water reflected the sky, and the sky reflected the soul. The boundary between inside and outside disappeared. The next morning, the samurai left the temple and walked through the forest. The wind touched his face. The leaves whispered ancient secrets. Nature seemed to recognize him, as if to say, "Now you have returned." Because whoever rediscovers themselves also rediscovers the world. But the journey was far from over. The defeated ego always awaits the first distraction to return. Days later, upon arriving at a nearby village, he was received as a hero. Old acquaintances recalled his victories, his legends, his battles, and for a moment, he felt the old poison return, pride. His mind whispered, "They admire you. You are special." This was the first sign of relapse. The weak self is reborn in praise more quickly than in. But Haru, now awakened, perceived the movement. He smiled silently and answered within his mind, "I am merely the observer." That night, he refused lodging, food, and honors. He slept in the open air, under the sound of the wind and rain. And he understood that freedom is always where comfort ends. When the body trembles and the mind falls silent, the spirit awakens. It was there, in the cold, that he had a vision. He saw himself forging a sword in fire. The iron represented his mind, the hammer his choices, and each blow, a death. The weak self melted and took shape again, purer, firmer, more whole. He awoke with the sunrise. He picked up his sword and saw that it reflected the light differently. It wasn't just the metal that shone, it was him. On his way back, he crossed paths with a young apprentice, panting, carrying his sword with both hands, stumbling with every step. The boy recognized him and asked, "Teach me to be strong like you." Haru replied, "Before you can be strong, learn to be empty." The boy frowned, not understanding. Haru simply walked away, leaving the answer to the wind. Because true strength is invisible. It is born in the space between two thoughts. And in that silence, the warrior realized that what he had always sought was not victory, appearance. The first step to an unbreakable mind is accepting one's own impermanence. Following days were as silent as the interior of a mountain. Sun rose and set, and the samurai walked through the forest, guided only by his own. He no longer sought anything outside, but inside, something still stirred. A remnant of identity, a spark of the old self, the weak self that pretended to be dead, but patiently waited for the right moment to turn. The mind is like a dusty mirror. You can clean it 1,000 times. Just a breath of distraction is enough to blur the image again. One afternoon, while walking, Haru spotted a village being looted. Masked men, fire, screams. His instincts kicked in. He ran towards the flames, wielding his sword. He fought as if the air breathed rage. Each blow was precise, but something burned inside him. Not compassion, fury. When the last invader fell, he stopped. Blood dripped from his blade, and the reflection of the fire danced in it. The people around him hailed him as a hero, and he felt the sweet poison of pride pulsing once. In the midst of the chaos, an old woman approached. Her face was wrinkled, her eyes deep. She looked at him for a few seconds and said only one sentence, "You're still fighting for yourself." Those words struck him like a sword. That night, far from the village, he knelt by the riverbank. He washed his hands in the moonlight and felt the shame wash away with the water. How many times had he believed he was purifying himself, when in reality, he was only feeding a more subtle, more sophisticated ego, the ego of the enlightened one. And there, in the midst of solitude, he understood that the weak self is cunning. It disguises itself as strength, as virtue, even as wisdom. It can kneel, it can meditate, it can speak of humility, and still want to be admired for it. The internal battle never ends. It only changes form. For 3 days, he remained by the riverbank fasting. His body weakened, his mind wavered, and the boundary between reality and dream began. On the 3rd night, fever overcame. He found himself standing in the middle of an empty field, surrounded by shadows. Before him stood a man identical to himself, but with cold, distant eyes. "I am what you reject," said the shadow. "I am fear, pride, doubt, desire. Everything you tried to kill still lives within me." Haru tried to raise the sword, but his arm wouldn't move. The shadow smiled. "You believed you could destroy me with discipline, but iron cannot cut the invisible." And the samurai did what he had never done before. He dropped his sword. Shadow enveloped him. Darkness covered him entirely. For a moment he thought he was dying, but it wasn't death, it was dissolution. When he awoke, his body trembled, his mind was blank. He didn't know how much time had passed. The river flowed calmly, indifferently. He realized that something inside him had been ripped away. Pride, the desire to be admired, the need to be someone, it had all been burned away. But along with that came emptiness. For weeks, he wandered aimlessly. He slept wherever his body fell, ate whatever he found, and spoke little. Sometimes he wondered if he was still a warrior or just a man who had forgotten his own name. It was during this period that he discovered true humility, not the kind that is displayed, but the kind that completely dissolves the self. One day, he found a blind monk sitting by the side of a road. The man seemed to be waiting for someone who wouldn't come. Haru stopped and asked, "Why do you wait if you can't see?" The monk replied, "Because those who see with their eyes are deceived. I await that which has no form." Those words ignited something within him. He sat down beside the monk. They remained silent. Time faded away. The monk spoke again. "You seek an unbreakable mind, but you still fear breaking. Iron only becomes a sword when it passes through fire." Haru lowered her head. "But if I can't resist?" The monk smiled. "Then, finally, he will stop resisting." These words stayed with him throughout the winter. He then decided to return to the temple where he had trained. When he arrived, the place was abandoned. The walls were covered in moss, the tatami mat covered in dust. Only the sound of the wind could be heard. He knelt in the center of the dojo and drew his sword from its sheath. The metal was cold, the reflection blurry. "This sword is a reflection of my mind." Softly. "Rusty, it's who?" He lit the fire. He placed the blade on the embers and watched the metal begin to color. The sound of the heat expanding the steel was almost long. For hours he stood there, watching the process. When the metal became incandescent, he picked up the hammer and began forging again. Each blow was a memory, pain, shattered belief. The sound echoed off the empty walls like an ancient ritual. And with each hammer blow, he felt that something inside him was also being shaped. When he finished, he plunged the sword into the water. The steam rose like mist, and for a moment he felt as if he were breathing his own soul. He picked up the blade. The reflection was pure. There was no shadow, excessive glare, balance. But in that reflection, he didn't see himself, saw nothing, and smiled. He understood that an unbreakable mind is not one that resists everything, one that no longer needs to resist anything. He returned to training, but with a different energy. His movements were smooth, his intentions invisible. When he struck, it wasn't him striking, the very air moving through his body. The seasons have changed. The scars of the past have become lines of wisdom. Silence has ceased to be the absence of sound and presence. One night, while watching the moon reflected in the lake, he felt something different. His mind was so quiet that the whole world seemed to breathe. And then he heard within his own heart the voice he had always sought. "Didn't destroy your weak self. You integrated it." The tears came without warning, not from sadness, but from relief. Throughout his life, he had believed he needed to kill parts of himself. Fear, doubt, pain. But now he saw that each of them was a teacher in disguise, showing him what pride wouldn't let him see. An unbreakable mind is not made of purity. It is made of total acceptance. That morning, Haru buried the sword in the temple floor. It served its purpose. Now the fight is different. At dawn, he left without taking anything. He went through the villages, helping farmers, repairing fences, carrying water, teaching children. Those who recognized him were astonished. A samurai doing servant work? He simply smiled. A samurai who has conquered himself doesn't need to prove he's a samurai. Over time, stories about him circulate. They called him the silent warrior. They said his mere presence calmed the hearts of the afflicted. But he didn't see himself as a master, nor as a sage, just as someone who had stopped fighting against distance. And that's how he discovered true victory, living without acting without intention, serving without expecting anything in return. An unbreakable mind is one that bends to the flow of life without losing its center. But fate, ever watchful, bears the final test for those who achieve calm. Because it's easy to remain at peace when the world is silent. It's difficult to maintain peace when chaos calls again. And he would come. Winter had arrived, and with it, the white silence that covers everything in purity and oblivion. Haru walked through the snowy mountains, unhurried, with steps that left almost no marks. The cold wind cut his face, but inside, there was warmth. The fire of consciousness never goes out in those who learn to inhabit it. Each step was a reminder of everything he had lived through. The frightened boy, the proud warrior, the man who lost himself in his own strength, the being who was reborn from the void. They all coexisted within him, without conflict, without hierarchy. But life always demands one last offering from those who believe they have found peace. One morning, Haru arrived at a ruined village. The houses were burned, the trees withered, the silence heavy. In the center, a group of armed men held villagers kneeling. He recognized the symbol on their cloaks. They were mercenaries, same clan that years before had destroyed everything he loved. His heart pounded. The old fire rekindled. For an instant, the samurai of the past rose within him. His body remembered, his blood remembered, his instinct remembered. But then, something deeper answered. Calm. The wind blew, lifting snowflakes that spiraled around his body. Haru breathed, and each breath seemed to merge heaven and earth within it. He could attack. He could kill everyone there, and he would be applauded for it. But he knew that would be a victory for the old self, the self that sought justice to avenge its own pain. Then he walked to the center of the village. The mercenaries saw him and laughed. "Look, a monk with a sword," they mocked. "What did you come to do, old warrior? Pray for them." He did not answer. He stopped before them, placed his hand on the hilt of his sword, and instead of drawing it, he knelt down. The gesture confused everyone. Silence fell like a mountain upon the field. One of the men approached, angrily. "Will you kneel before us?" Haru raised his eyes, and there was something in them that no armed man could comprehend, an absence of fear. "I do not kneel before you," he said. "I kneel before life, even when it comes disguised as a mercenary consumed by rage, attacked." Haru moved with the lightness of a thought. The blade emerged from its sheath for an inch, just long enough. The blow was clean, silent. The man fell before he even understood what had happened. The group retreated. Haru remained motionless. There was no hatred, no pleasure, only presence. The leader hesitated. "Who are you?" The samurai replied, "I am nobody, and that is why nothing in me can." Those words were the end of the fight. None of them dared to advance. One by one, they lowered their weapons and retreated, as if an invisible force were pushing them away. The villagers wept, but Haru did not celebrate. He knew the victory was not over men, but over himself. That night he lit a bonfire in the center of the village. The fire illuminated tired faces, told stories, not about wars, but about silence. He spoke of fear that teaches, of pain that purifies, surrender that liberates. The children listened with open eyes. The old people smiled. For the first time in a long time, the people slept. When dawn arrived, Haru departed before anyone could see him. The true warrior never seeks applause. He dissolves into the journey like the wind that passes through the leaves and uses his path. He walked to the top of a mountain and watched the sun rise. The golden light covered the valleys, and the world seemed to breathe along with it. Up there, he understood what no master had explained. The weak self was never a flaw. It was the ground upon which strength was built. Without falling, there is no rising. Without doubt, there is no faith. Without fear, there is no courage. He raised his sword one last time and plunged it into the ground before him. The metallic sound echoed like distant thunder. "This blade has cut through bodies, cut through illusions. Now it cuts through time itself," he said. "May it remain here as a reminder that the mind does not become unbreakable by hardening, but by understanding." The wind blew strongly, and for a moment it seemed as if the mountain... Haru closed her eyes and smiled. He had discovered that discipline is merely the path to the portal. On the other side, there is only freedom. The freedom to be whole, without needing to win. Days later, no one saw him again. Some say he climbed to the top of the mountain and became part of the wind. Others believe he lived among the villagers as a simple farmer. But everyone who crossed paths with him kept the same memory. Calm gaze of someone who had already passed through the fire and returned with his heart intact. Time passed. The legend of the silent warrior spread throughout the region. Monks, warriors, and pilgrims visited the abandoned temple where he had lived. In the center, the sword still lay embedded in the ground, covered in moss, but intact. And engraved on the blade were words that no one knew who had written. "Strength is born when the weak stop fighting against themselves." Years later, a young apprentice arrived at the temple. He sat before the sword, wept. He didn't know why. Perhaps because, in that silence, something inside him was also beginning to break. And that's always how transformation begins. Crack. An unbreakable mind isn't made of steel. It's made of the 1,000 times you've broken and yet still chosen to remain. When the young man left, the wind blew through the cracks in the temple, making the blade vibrate slightly. The sound was soft, almost human, as if the warrior spirit was still there, reminding everyone that true strength is silent. Haru's story has been lost to time, but its lesson remains. Destroying the weak self is not about exterminating fear, doubt, or pain. About looking at all of that, because what you call weakness is simply the part of you that hasn't yet learned. And when that trust is born, when you finally understand that there is no enemy within, only parts asking to be loved, then the mind becomes unbreakable. The true warrior is not the one who wins battles. It is the one who no longer needs to fight. If you've made it this far, it's because something within you also wants to forge a new mind. A mind that doesn't run from pain, doesn't negotiate with doubt, and doesn't need approval to exist. But before you go to sleep tonight, do what Haru did. Sit quietly, breathe, pay attention to what appears, the fear, the tiredness, the voice that says you won't succeed, and smile, because it is there, in that instant, that the weak self reveals itself, and when you see it clearly, it loses its power. You don't need to destroy it forcefully, just watch until it transforms. This is the forge, this is the fire. One day, when you look back, realize that everything that broke you was exactly what shaped you. Steel is not born steel. It is born impure, brittle, unstable. It is fire that transforms it into something worthy of being wielded. That's how the mind is. The weak self is iron. Pain is fire. Discipline is the hammer. And silence, the blacksmith. In the end, you will understand that there was never anything to destroy. Just something to wake up. If this story resonated with you, write in the comments. I am forging my mind, not to prove your strength, but to remember who you've always like, subscribe, and turn on notifications, not out of habit, but as a gesture of your presence. Every conscious click is a small victory over chaos. Remember, the journey doesn't end when you overcome your weak self. It begins when you realize that the fire never meant to burn you, only to shape you.